Hello and welcome to Worlds Apart. Political Islam has been a popular topic for debates in the West, but much less so in the Middle East, where these concepts are being tested out, often with disastrous consequences. Is it too late to leave the region to its own devices? Well, to discuss it, I'm now joined by Tariq Ramadan, Professor of Contemporary Islamic Studies at Oxford University. Dr. Ramadan, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for your invitation.
Now, Dr. Ramadan, about 3 years ago, you wrote that there was a tacit agreement between the West on one hand and Russia and China on the other hand, not to agree on Syria, not to come to any conclusion. Has it changed since then? Because we have seen a flurry of diplomatic activity lately. Is that all for show?
Look, I think that unfortunately what is happening in Syria, first we have to just condemn the violence and to once again be clear on our condemnation of what Daesh and ISIL is doing, and even the governments. And I think that there is a call for finding a solution. Unfortunately, and I said it from the very beginning, when I was writing about the so-called Arab Spring, that in fact the situation is going to last for a long time, and there is a tacit agreement not to find a solution, because unfortunately this unstable Syria is destabilizing the whole region, and at the end the civil population is paying the price, but we don't see anything as a solution today.
Well, this is exactly what I would contend, that we don't see anything as a solution. I don't know about the United States, but I think Russia is pretty committed to breaking the deadlock. Otherwise, it wouldn't send its forces there. The question is, to me at least, is whether you think the Putin government has enough to entice the Obama administration to pursue this fragile peace process. And we have to admit that there is a peace process on the ground. There are at least 60 communities that have already joined this temporary ceasefire. Do you think there are enough arguments, enough of an enticement that Moscow can offer to Washington to finally negotiate something that will put an end to all this carnage?
Unfortunately, I think that yes, after almost now 5 years, what we are witnessing is a disaster in the region, and we can see that Russia is trying to be more, it was involved from the very beginning and finding a solution in the region. I don't see it as Russia being able to force or to influence the American or the European policy over there. So we are still far from a final peace agreement. These are steps, and I think that we have to acknowledge that things are moving, but still what is going on the ground. And at the end, let me ask a question. Do you really think, if we were serious about putting an end to Daesh and ISIL in the region, this wouldn't have been possible? Why is there this disagreement about even the common target there and the way this has to be done? I really think that beyond the steps, there are realities on the ground, and this destabilized Syria as well as Iraq today is for a while, and still for a while, useful for some actors within the region, and especially for the United States of America and European countries.
Well, Dr. Ramadan, the question about Daesh or ISIL, I think, is a very valid one, but I think there is also, perhaps it is masked, or perhaps it is sidelined by another major point of disagreement, and this is the fate of Bashar al-Assad. And on this particular question, I find your position very interesting, because on the one hand, you are known for being very critical of the American policies. You expressed some of that just now, but on the other hand, when it comes to Bashar al-Assad, you happen to be in the same camp, not only with the Americans, but also with the Saudis, those two countries that in the past at least used to ban your entry. So don't you find this ironic?
It's not ironic. It's a question of principles, and I'm not on the side of Saudi Arabia. I'm banned from going there, And I'm critical of all dictators. And for me, from the beginning, his father and himself are dictators. So it's a question of principles. It's not a question of strategy. I'm against the Saudi regime, and I can say this. I'm against the American policy. So I can understand now why Russia is supporting Bashar for geostrategic reasons. But I met lots of Russian people who would agree with me that at the end of the day, the way he is managing the country and running the country, it's out of autocracy and it's a dictatorship. So I'm not positioning myself in geostrategic reasons.
Absolutely, and I would not defend Bashar al-Assad or even try to defend Bashar al-Assad here. I think his qualities as a leader are up to the Syrian people to pass judgment on. I hope they will be given an opportunity to do that at the ballot points. But what I find very interesting in what you just said, and you wrote about it extensively, that it is a matter of principle to you. And this is a very common position among European Muslims who for some reason believe that Europe is their home, but for some other reason unknown to me, they also believe that they have this opportunity, they have this ability, they have this moral right to tell the people of Syria what should be their principles or what should be their values. Isn't it a little bit interventionist on your part?
No, I wouldn't say this. I'm not representing the European Muslims. I'm just saying, look, if you trust the electoral or the elections in Syria, so go and trust the elections in Egypt and trust the elections or the non-election in Saudi Arabia. No, I'm sorry, it's not transparency. There is not a question of saying what is good for the Syrian people. I was banned from Syria 18 years ago because I was against the father, and I said this is a dictatorship, and I'm still banned from there because I'm saying that there is no legitimacy and the electoral process is not a transparent electoral process. Now, having said that, if you avoid putting yourself in only geostrategic interests, you just have to go for principles and to say, at the end of the day, if we are for democratization, we should be for democratization, whatever the result. So yes, if now you are telling me the future in Syria is to have transparent elections, I would say yes, but real transparent elections. Let's go for that.
Dr. Ramadan, with all due respect, there is a big difference between saying that the system is rigged, that it is not transparent, and insisting that the leader of that country has to leave tomorrow without having any idea about who is going to come and replace him or whether a new system will be even reminiscent of democratic system. And this is, I think, where your argument is very much the argument of George W. Bush, because he went to Iraq, at least the pretext that he gave was to democratize Iraq, and he went there on the principle of making the world a better place. So in a way, I understand that you share a religion, you share ethnicity, you share a connection with the people of Syria, but I hope that does not give you any moral jurisdiction over what people of Syria have to do.
It's not a moral jurisdiction. It's not a moral jurisdiction. It's just a question of principle. I don't buy anything coming from George W. Bush, even with Barack Obama, when they are saying that they are promoting democracy and democratization. If this would have been the truth, they would start with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, where there is no democracy. They don't care about democracy. They only care about geostrategic interests. On the other side, what I would like to see coming from Russia, it's another position, which is a position of principle, which is to say, don't tell me that the people in Syria or the people in Egypt are choosing their leader today in the dictatorships. That's not true. So if you are telling, what you are talking about now, which is interesting, it's the transitory period. How are we going to get rid of dictatorships? And on this, I may agree with you, it cannot be done through the United States coming and commanding who has to be in charge, because they supported the dictators for years and now they want to change for their own interests. So the transitory period, it's very important, I agree. But the final point here is that we are not going, and I cannot support a dictator in order to avoid only the change within the society or the so-called potential disorder. I think that the final answer to this is that we don't want a dictator running any country in the region.
That's for sure. On that point, we can definitely agree. Can I extend that discussion about principles to one more country?
We agree on that. that's fine.
Absolutely. I would like to extend it, though, to one more country and one more leader. And I heard you say in the past that one reason for destabilizing Syria was to indirectly undermine Turkey, which was getting increasingly more powerful within the region. And I would claim that Turkey has been very eager to get itself involved in Syria. I think it made some pretty questionable contribution to peace and stability in that country. How do you feel about Turkey's recent trajectory, both domestically and internationally?
I think that there are many reasons. Turkey, by the way, like Russia in the region, were the new very, very powerful actors over the last 10 years. And all what is happening now is destabilizing even Russia, and this was also one of the the real challenge and the real objective behind the so-called Arab Spring was also to destabilize and ensure security, to help the Americans and the European countries to come back and to take over more and to manage more the region. What is happening now is that Russia is now playing a very important role, and it's now successful in playing a role, while the support of Turkey towards the opposition in Syria was also to help to change the regime there and to try to find a new stability, which is not happening now.
Dr. Ramadan, even putting aside what Turkey has been doing within Syria, I mean, if we just look at the domestic situation, I have Turkish friends here in Russia and in the United States who are afraid to go to Turkey for the fear of being arrested. We have the Hizmet movement, the Gulen movement, which has never been implicated in violence, now being openly branded a terrorist organization. You called on this very program, you called Assad a tyrant. What is Erdogan in your book?
No, I wouldn't say that you cannot compare Erdogan and Assad, even though I'm critical of Erdogan in many ways. And I think that when it comes to freedom, when it comes to freedom within, when it comes to supporting and carrying on transparent policy, there are questions and we have to be critical. Now you can't, through the election and the transparent election that happened in Turkey, say that it is the same. There are no transparent elections in Syria. Now, in Turkey, you can and you should be critical towards authoritarianism, towards less freedom for the minorities or for the media. That's true. But you cannot just put them on the same level. The second thing, which is very important, I think that the policy and the vision of Turkey towards Syria is problematic, and it has to do with for them to try to find new stability. It doesn't work. So far, this strategy is not working. What they had, with Davutoglu when he was speaking about no conflict at the borders is not working. It's completely destabilized. So the new actor, Turkey as a new actor now, and a powerful actor over the last 10 years, is now very much a question in the current strategy. So I think that
Dr. Ramadan, I think you're being very, very gracious to President Erdogan. I think I would agree with all your points about the superiority of Turkish political system, but Turkey was a democracy when he came to power, and it's increasingly moving in a different direction. When we are talking about Syria, Syria was never a democracy. You just made that point.
Look, you are going too far in generalizing, and even in what you are saying is that you are increasingly becoming something. It's not exactly the same as saying that it's a dictatorship. Please, by all standards, even in Russia, when you have no election, when you are elected with 93% of the people, as it was in Syria, when you have a dictator and the way he is, there is no election in Syria. Please don't compare this with an elected government, and even if the elected government is increasingly going towards authoritarianism, let us be consistent with our critique.
Absolutely. In order to be consistent, I'm afraid you're suggesting that we have to wait and see if Mr. Erdogan decides to cancel elections altogether.
You are saying, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, you are comparing and saying Erdogan is the same as Assad. I'm sorry, even in your country, in Russia, this is not acceptable by any standards. Now, we can't say this. You can't say this to all the elections. This is only an ideological position that you are taking, speaking from Russia, and I can understand this. But please, when it comes to principles, as I told you, I'm not gracious with anybody. I'm just trying to be consistent with some of the principles. I'm critical towards what is happening within Turkey today and even the foreign policy. But you can't in any way say that what Assad is today is the same as Erdogan. And what we have to say is that for the future, even if we need a transitory period, in the future we need to stop any kind of dictatorship, and we get rid of this, meaning that in the future the solution is not with Assad. In the future. Now the transitory period has to do with finding a way.
Well, Dr. Ramadan, we have to take a short break now, but when we come back, whether we like it or not, ISIL is also a form of political Islam. How viable is it? That's coming up in a moment on Worlds Apart. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Worlds Apart. We are discussing the events in the Middle East with Tariq Ramadan, Professor of Contemporary Islamic Studies at Oxford University. Dr. Ramadan, just recently, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry visited Egypt, where he met with the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and his remarks afterwards were very, very telling. He didn't mention the word democracy once. He didn't mention principles once. Instead, he reiterated several times how critical Egypt is to the peace and security of the entire region. And that is very reminiscent of what American officials used to say in front of Mubarak. We talked about the American position perhaps slightly changing on Syria. Is the same happening in Egypt?
No, and I think on this we can agree, and we are agreeing on this. I think that even, in Syria, when we hear today that the Americans or even the European countries are against Assad for the sake of democracy, it's a joke. They don't care about democracy. They care about geostrategic interests. Syria in the region has to do with geostrategic interests and even the support towards Israel as well. On the other side, when it comes to the revealing reality here, is what is happening in Egypt. They are now supporting Sisi. There is no democracy. The French government, the French president went there, Kerry went there. They are supporting dictators, and they come in Syria and say, oh, we want democracy there. That's a joke. This is hypocritical stances that they have. They don't care about even the people either in Syria or in Egypt, and they are supporting only interests and governments that are protecting their interests.
Perhaps Western leaders do not care about the people in Egypt, but I'm sure people in Egypt care about themselves and the state of their democracy. That's why I want to ask you this question. Given your family's legacy in that country and your grandfather's role in founding the Muslim Brotherhood, do you think the political realities in Egypt would have been the same today had the Muslim Brothers limited themselves to social and community roles rather than venturing into politics back in 2011, 2012?
Yes, I think you are right. And I wrote a book, The Arab Awakening, about this, saying that if this was the first mistake, it was they were so much obsessed with taking over at one point in their history that they made a mistake. And I think that what happened over 1 year of their running the country was full of mistakes. It doesn't justify the coup that came with Sisi, but I think that they made lots of mistakes. On the other hand, having said that, today the situation in Egypt is worse than for the last 50 years even. It's the worst in modern history that we find, and we have to be clear about this. So I'm very critical towards the Muslim Brotherhood and even the way they dealt with the government and even the political landscape. Without justifying the coup. And now we have to come and to be very critical with what is happening and to say once again, asking Russia and asking the West and asking the Americans if you really care about the people.
Well, for that you will have to provide a definition to dictatorship, and I think many people would perhaps disagree on that. If I may ask you something that has been perplexing me.
As long as, look, As long as you don't ask the people their choice and there is no transparent electoral process, at the end is the dictatorship. So now we can play with words, but the reality is what the people are experiencing on
I think one lesson that can be drawn, and tell me if I'm wrong here, from the evolution of both the Erdogan government and the Morsi government, is that whenever Islamic beliefs are introduced into the policy realm, over time, this political ideology acquires a more expansive character. Is political Islam, at least as we know it, the way it's been discussed lately, is it capable of constraining itself?
I think, look, you have to be very cautious with this, because I think that over 1 year, it's very difficult to judge what would have been the country under the Muslim Brotherhood, once again, with all the mistakes that they made. On the other side, I don't see anything that is connected to Islam in the way Erdogan is running the country. So I don't think it's the Islamic features that is making him more authoritarian in the way he's dealing. So it's not the Islamic characteristic or the Islamic features.
I'm sure you know this famous quote that has been attributed to Erdogan about democracy being like a train, and there are a lot of analysts who believe that it was Erdogan personally who pushed the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt into the
Tell me what is
positions.
Islamic. No. Tell me what is Islamic about the way he's running the country. You know, it's not. He's dealing with the secular model. He is very much involved in the liberal economy. I don't think that it has to do with a personality. It has to be with an individual. And even within the party now, within the AKP now in Turkey, there are people who, over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, were saying the way it's run, it's problematic. So I don't think it has to do with the very specific feature. And for example, if you go to Morocco, you will see that there is an Islamist party running, and it's not less. There is not less freedom over there. I think that to essentialize by saying when it comes to Islam being connected to politics, this is what is going to happen.
But Dr. Ramadan,
it could happen, of course.
What I'm trying to say is that perhaps Erdogan himself is essentializing what he means by political Islam. I'm obviously no expert on this issue, so I definitely wouldn't dare to make such generalizations. But clearly what he believes to be doing is putting Islam into politics and policies.
No, this is what you are saying. I don't think that what we see now is something which is Islamization of his politics. It has to do with a trend which is happening within the country, which has nothing to do with the Islamic features. And I think that he's saying about himself that he's a Muslim, a Democrat, a conservative Democrat. This is the way he's portraying himself. And I think that once again, I wrote an article about going beyond political Islam, so I'm very critical of the ideology itself, but I think we should not come to analyzing these policies through the religious prism. It might be more efficient just to come and to try to see what are the policies on the ground and why it's done. I don't think that the positioning of Erdogan towards Syria has to do with Islam. It has to do with geostrategic interest as much as Putin has geostrategic interest to protect. And you have to start acknowledging this before spreading around that you have principles and no interests.
Well, Dr. Ramadan, the so-called Islamic State is also a form of political Islam, whether we like it or not. And a number of reports have suggested that over the last 18 months or so, the flow of foreigners to and from Syria and Iraq has changed dramatically. It used to be predominantly young males, but more and more we are starting to see families with children, with the elderly making the trip. Does that mean that ISIL ideology is becoming more mainstream?
No, I still think that if you look at the figures and the fact and what is happening on the ground, this is very, very, very marginal. Now it's marginal, but it's serious. And we have to be clear on this, that ISIL and the ideology of Daesh and ISIL, these are people instrumentalizing Islam. They are Muslims and they are reading the Quran, but they are distorting the message. So we have to deal with them by rejecting and coming with robust arguments against what they are doing. And we have also to be clear, the people who are attracted in Europe or in other countries, there might be families, there might be now more and more young girls. This is where we have to be quite clear about our Islamic position by condemning what they are doing, and at the same time be very clear and try to deal with this instrumentalization, because they are very smart and they are very, very intelligent and knowledgeable about the way you can use internet and the social networks. This is where also we need to be aware of this brainwash.
Absolutely, Dr. Ramadan. And one final point that I would just I would like to add is that they have been allowed to do that for way too long. The point that you mentioned earlier in the program, that these people have been operating in Syria for quite some time, you know, it has to be considered by people not only in Moscow, but also in Washington and some other European capitals, because whether you like it or not, there are ways of limiting the flow of both fighters and the flow of weapons into Syria. And by the way, Mr. Erdogan perhaps could also pay some attention to that.
All of us, I think that all of us, we have to be quite clear about our condemnation and try to find the concerted strategies to deal with this and to try to stop ISIL and Daesh are very important. I don't think that any country can lecture another one and patronize on this. We all have our shortcomings, but what is clear is that at the forefront Muslims should speak out, and then policies and governments should come together, because at the end it will affect all of us. The consequences of such an ideology are tremendously dangerous for all of us.
Well, Dr. Ramadan, on this conciliatory note, we have to leave it there. I really appreciate your time, and to our viewers, please share your comments on our Twitter, Facebook and YouTube pages, and I hope to see you again, same place, same time, here on Worlds Apart.